My name is Nan Brandon. I'm a genealogist up in the fourth floor reference room. Before we get started, we really appreciate the patron feedback because that can tell us how you feel about this type of program, but also put any programs that you'd like to see in the future on any subject. I'd like to introduce our speaker, J.B. Hogan. He's a poet, author, and local historian. In fact, some of his books are on the back. Some of them are his nonfiction book. The Angel in the Ozarks book is his nonfiction book. We have other nonfictions, but they are referenced at the moment. They can't be checked out. There's 3 books back there on the subject that he's talking about. One of those books is a book of poetry, which has other people in it, but it has John Rollin Ridge's poetry in it, about 5 of them. So if you want to check those out, you can. So JB's been published in many journals. He's won many awards, and he's written 12 books. I've just brought 3 of his nonfiction and 1 of his nonfiction. And they're mostly all available to check out here. Welcome, JB.
Thank you, Nancy. Great, we peek out right there. So fill out the forms. So I always have to start with thank yous, and number 1 is thank you for showing up. This is the second in 2 programs with the Library and the Historical Society in which we preview the upcoming flashback, the Journal of the Historical Society. The other one we had in the Ann Henry room, if it hadn't been for Malin and some guy that just drifted in there, that would have been it. So this is a much bigger crowd. Thank you very much for showing up. So I want to thank Nancy, the library. I want to thank Cora for being here. I thank Patsy Watkins for providing covers so I could show you guys what things are going to look like. And can you hear me okay? Yes. Okay. I think that's all the thank yous. So the advertisement said I'm going to be talking about John Rollin Ridge, and I am, but I got to get to John Rollin by talking about, well, I don't have to, but I'm going to talk about the early Cherokee history here in our area. When we were putting this together, Patsy Watkins, our editor, asked me if I'd go back to, and I'll show you in a minute, back to March of this year, the spring issue of Flashback, when I did an article about the early local Cherokee history here. And then I did John Rollin Ridge, which will be coming out, what is today, the 22nd, in about 10 days or something like that. The one on John Rollin will be there. And by the way, both of these articles will be in Forgotten Fayetteville 2. If you've seen my first book, Forgotten Fayetteville, they'll both be in Forgotten Fayetteville 2, which I drug Susan Park Spencer in as my co-author so I could widen my range of information to everybody. Okay, so there's the cover for the issue getting ready to come out. And I was talking to Rebecca. John Rollin Ridge is a handsome guy, I think, and very intense. And when we go over a little bit of his life, you'll see why he was so intense. Anyway, okay, so that was the cover, and this is the table of contents. And my stories, it's kind of nice when your stories, the lead one with the picture makes you feel good. Anyway, so it's the first one there. And then Patsy's got something about Herbert Hoover. Before he was president, he was over in the Cane Hill area, Boonesboro. Vanessa McEwen, who is actually the executive director of the Cane Hill, historic Cane Hill project, she's got an article in there. My friend Amanda Bancroft has part 2 of her article about the 2 sisters that traveled around the world. I can't remember how many days. I think it took them over a year or something when they did that, a big long trip. And then right here in the second row, my cousin Russell Gare, there he is right there. He's writing about Moses Dutton, who was a minister, and he renamed Goshen, our community out there, from College Grove, married one of our distant relatives. And so Russell's writing about him, Moses Dutton. And then the only person I don't know is Jack Rash, but that looks like a really interesting article. The self-proclaimed Earl of West Fork. By the way, I can barely see this stuff, so if I read something wrong, just blame it on my eyeballs. And then Malin's talking about the Science Body Shop after 100 years. Where's Malin at? Where'd you go? Did you want to say something real quick about it?
Oh, no, it's just in there.
Okay. It's in there. Well, that's mine's in there too, and all the other people. So anyway, so that picture down there is a drawing of Joaquin Murrieta, which is John Rollin Ridge's famous novel that he wrote. Okay, So let's go now. Let's backtrack. I got to do the first. So, and if you guys in the back tell me speed up, Hogan, speed up if I'm taking too long. So this is a flashback of the spring that had the article about their early history of the Cherokee, and that's Buddy Hayes. I used to live really well, practically neighbors across Otis Parker's field, and there was I walked by Buddy Hayes' house every single day at Jefferson School when I was a little kid. And that's JoJo Thompson on piano, another legendary musician, and that's Clifford, I believe, Clifford Half Pint Thompson, I think his little brother, over there on the left, and that's Royce Jones, who I don't know. I'm going to do this stuff. You guys know me. I'm going to drift. Half Pint Thompson was like a master. Corey's already telling me to speed it up. So anyway, Half Pint Thompson used to hang out with the Fayetteville professional baseball team that was here, which I write about in Angels in the Ozarks. I went through the book, and somehow Half Pint didn't make my book. I know he made my article somewhere, but somehow I left him out of the book. It really upset me. But anyway, he was like a little bitty kid back then. It was in the 30s. Anyway, so that's the cover. And so let's start with, before I get to the local guys, we need to do, I wanted to talk about the Cherokee Old Settlers, but it would take, we'd be here all night doing this. So in fact, let me just say right now, I'm not an expert on Cherokee history, but I've researched a bit for this, or quite a bit. And anyway, so it starts, everything having to do with removal, Cherokee, always goes back to Andrew Jackson. And if you guys know me, I try not to judge people in the past too much, but he's my least favorite guy. And I wanted to talk about the Old Settlers. I'm going to drift. I do it every time. So there's a treaty of the Cherokee Agency in 1817. Top name, Major General Andrew Jackson. That was swapping land in Tennessee for land in Arkansas. There's another one, Treaty of Turkeytown in Alabama, which was some more land, right? Top name on there, Major General Andrew Jackson, and now he's president by now. And so they put in that Indian Removal Act, which actually, I'm sorry guys, I want to do this, but I have to give background every time. It's like I was always kind of like, okay, so we become a country. In 1783, the war is over. And I'm going, in 20 years, you're already chasing everybody out of where they live. And the truth of it is, the British were doing it 150 years before that. We just continued this policy of removing. And Thomas Jefferson, who I admire greatly for a lot of ways, he wanted to move every Native American west of the Mississippi. And so, in those days, it wasn't viewed the way we view it now. I get it. But anyway. So he was president from 29 to 37. And this is the one that the Choctaw were actually the first people in the Trail of Tears. And this is the one that got me going, because I did an article about some guys using Choctaw script to buy a bunch of land around here. And it's like within 20 years of the Revolution, the U.S. government was trying to get the Choctaw out of Mississippi so they could get to them big fields and grow cotton down there. And I'm going, good Lord, can you wait a minute? But anyway, the Choctaw were the first ones to go on the Trail of Tears. Anyway, so then the one that's going to lead us into our local history was on December 29th, 1835, the Treaty of New Echota, Georgia. And that's the one that's also going to cause a schism in the Cherokee Nation. Major Ridge and John Ridge, Elias Boudinot, whose real name was Buck Wadey, and Stan Wadey, and a bunch of other guys, signed the treaty with the U.S. government without the approval of Principal Chief John Ross and a large portion of the Cherokee Nation. And so when the Trail of Tears, then that was to move everybody out. I think they were trying to get the best deal they could, but it turned out into the Trail of Tears. And so after, you'll see that they were blamed for all the trouble of the Trail of Tears. Okay, so our local history here starts, if you will, like I said, the Old Settlers were a little bit to our east and south, and then to the south and over in the Indian Territory. They were not directly in here in our area. But so anyway, this was the fourth group of involuntary groups that left the east to come to Indian Territory. It was what it's called in Oklahoma now. And John Binns was the conductor of the group, about 1,100 people. And they actually, this is the only group that came directly into Fayetteville. They went right across the square and down, where am I? Fayetteville High. They camped underneath Fayetteville High. Yeah, that one over there, that Fayetteville High. And so the source on this, a lot of the source is from A.W. Arrington, if you guys know who that is. He wrote under the name Charles Summerfield, and he was a really interesting guy. We have a whole class on him, but he was really untrustworthy. He was actually here at the time, and he placed it in summertime instead of January 13th. So I always thought that was an odd thing right there. You were here. You don't remember what happened? Anyway, so they camped out there. So Arrington labeled the guys below Fayetteville High School as desperados, as the rougher part of the group, and that the hierarchy and the wealthy people went out to what used to be the fairgrounds out there at MLK and Razorback Road. When I was a kid, the fairgrounds were out there. That's how Arrington divided them. And so this is, I'll talk about this later, about Nelson Orr getting labeled as a desperado when he got killed here, which we're going to get to. Anyway, so that's, and the Goodspeed history, you guys probably know that 1889 Goodspeed history of Washington County. What they did in there, they took Arrington and just plopped him right in there. And so you can't trust the Goodspeed either because they just quoted him. Anyway, so on Sunday, January 13th, 1839, the John Binge contingent passes through Fayetteville and camps here. Okay, so they're down. Okay, so let me jump to this. So we can see these plaques honoring this. This is the first one from 1958. That's right at the south end of the women's soccer stadium on what is now Stadium Drive. It was Garland when I was a kid. They changed it to Stadium Drive. And you can see the three monoliths in the back representing a family. Walter Lemke was there the day that this was set up, this plaque here. And it was done by the sons and daughters of the DAC. That's the daughters of the American colonists, distinct from the DAR. And then about 2000, the U of A put up this plaque, which is much more accurate than the other one. Gives a proper number of people that came through and stuff like that. And somebody told me there's a couple more there, but there's no way to easily park there anymore, so I haven't had a chance to check it out. Anyway, that's the little park commemorating where the people camped. So now, okay, I'm going to do a square thing for you guys. Notice I don't know if I think it's a point or not. I hope that's a pointer. Hey, there you go. Notice that the square, if you look there, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All around the square, there's like 8 lots. And so that's how they sold them back in 1837. And I had to reread my book, me and Tony Wapple's The Square Book, to learn something about it. So right here, right now, it's that a store called Stash. That right there is where we believe is exactly where the Willis Wallace and Riley Wallace had their grocery, which is where whiskey is sold. Now, his older brother Alfred, I just rereading, discovered he had lots 1 and 2. Now, this is 1938, so it doesn't look anything like what it looked like. And so he had a general store there, and that really helped me understand more what it was. But anyway, so the Cherokee wanted to have, remember, this is 1839. Things are just a tad rougher than they are now. So these guys have been traveling like thousands of miles. They wanted some whiskey, and they went up to get some, and Willis and Riley opened up their grocery for them. And so while they were in there, all the stories from whichever angle I've seen them, some local guy insulted a Cherokee woman, and Nelson Orr came to her defense. Riley Wallace attacked Nelson Orr, and Nelson Orr was winning the fight. Willis Wallace, so I'm going to have to talk about it a little bit. I always say comes around, but I'm sure it was just like a stand practically. And he stabbed Nelson Orr with the equivalent of a Bowie knife. He mortally wounded him. I guess he hung on for a few days and before he died, but he mortally wounded him. Okay, Willis Wallace real quick. So about a couple of months after this, Willis and Riley find some guys playing cards and want to stop the card gaming. Hypocrisy much? Anyway, what they did was that Willis shot and killed one of those guys and stabbed another and stuck him to the ground, and a doctor saw it and saved him. A few months later, Riley sees the same guy that was stabbed and shoots him dead. So then that finally got the Wallaces out of town. These are the most, I think, the most dangerous people that may have ever lived in Fayetteville. They were really violent, as you can tell. Anyway, so that's what happened. And anyway, so when the Cherokee camped out down there, the so-called desperados, heard what happened, they started coming uptown and they were going to clean house. Because it happened from time to time. You get in a little bit of trouble. They were going to burn the dang place down. But there was this guy, Captain Cootie. I keep calling him Moody half the time. He somehow managed to stop that from happening. Anyway, so if you got, here's the other thing too. I'm going to give you, this is all overview stuff. If you want to read really good articles, David Malone, our friend, he in the late 90s, he wrote all about this stuff, real detail, taking details from the Arkansas Gazette and everything. So if you want to read more about it, do that. Anyway, so he kept us from getting burned down. Of course, we get burned down in the Civil War anyway, but he saved that early one. Anyway, so in May, Willis Wallace goes on trial, and you can see this, it's listed in the murder trials, and he's acquitted. And he was defended by all these early famous guys like Judge David, well, I wasn't a judge then, but David Walker. He's a real famous first settler type of guys. They defended him, and he got off. And so anyway, well, so A.W. Arrington was here, right? He sees all this stuff. I make fun of Arrington, and I talk about him, and he always came down on the right side of stuff. It's just he was not trustworthy about how he reported it. But he hated Willis Wallace. They had what they call the Wallace-Arrington War, and they ended up on the square in Fayetteville. It was so many details. Anyway, they ended up on the square, and they were going to attack Willis Wallace. Somewhere Willis got a cannon, and that ended that. He just aimed the cannon. They said, just like I would have done, see ya. If you know me, you probably heard me say that if I was in the Civil War, first time a cannon went off, I'd be going, see you fellas, I got to go home and take care of the garden. I'm out. Okay, so now I'm going to skip the Wright family murders on June 15th, Saturday, June 15th. They're out in Cane Hill, and it peripherally involves Cherokee, but that's a whole other deal. It would take us all night then, and Cora would be shrieking at me, stop! But anyway, so these, so in retaliation for the Trail of Tears, factions, now I want to be careful I say this, Principal Chief John Ross he never admitted to it, and there was never anybody linked to him directing these killings. Notice I use the word killing because assassination will stir up too much. These killings of these three men, two of whom are related to Rebecca right here. So it was amazing. Anyway, so I didn't bother with their death dates because they all died the same day. This is Elias Boudinot over here. That's Buck Wadey. And then there's John Ridge in the middle and Major Ridge on the side. And if I can remember this well enough, I'll try. Elias Boudinot was building his home in Park Hill, which is south of Tahlequah. And a group of men come out of the woods, say, hey, what's going on? And ended up hacking him and knifing him to death on his property. That's how he was killed. The major was going to Van Buren, and he was at a creek just on the other side of Dutch Mills on the west side of the county. And five or six men on the other side rode up and shot him. He took five bullet holes and killed the major. And then John Ridge. Now the Ridges lived up at Honey Creek, which is up in northeast Oklahoma, real near Missouri and Arkansas actually. And so anyway, so John Ridge, the husband of Sarah Ridge, the people of the Ridge House, I'll talk about in a minute. Early in the morning, right after, just after sunrise, I think, 20-something men broke into the home of John Ridge and his wife, and there's seven. No, they were all. Yeah, they had seven by then. They had all seven. All seven were born. So they had 7 kids, and they pulled John Ridge out there, fighting and hollering and screaming. Took him outside. There's several different accounts of all this stuff. But the account I read today was they held him, and one guy stabbed him repeatedly, as many as 25 times. And he didn't die even then. He died basically in Sarah's arms. But they stabbed and killed him. So it's really, and when we get to John Rollin in a little bit, keep that in mind. He's 12 years old, and he's watching this happen out in the front yard of his house. 25 men drag his father out of, whatever the case may be, you know what I mean? A little 12-year-old don't know about the schism and the thing. He just knows that's his dad. And they drag him out there and stabbed him to death in front of the whole family with Sarah screaming and crying and the children screaming. So it was a horrifying thing. Now, the fourth member of this group, the big hierarchy of the treaty party, was Stan Wadey. And I'm not sure where, I think he was somewhere in the area too of Honey Creek. But somebody managed to warn him. And he was not, he survived. He avoided the assassination or the killing. And later on, Stan Wadey actually, I don't know if I have that or not. Let me see if I put that. Yeah, there you go. He actually, this guy, James Foreman, was known as one of the leaders of this attack on everybody and killed him hand-to-hand combat. Stan Wadey did. And the other thing we have to remember all the time is that the, in particular the Treaty Party guys, is that they were pro-Confederacy. And Stan Wadey was a Confederate general, and he was actually the last Confederate general to surrender. So we have to remember those things. And I read one time, that, in my stuff I was reading, that he actually had 100 enslaved people at one point. He was a really rich and a big farmer. So you have to bring that stuff in too. Okay, so in the aftermath, now of the date, so this is Sarah Ridge older, much older there, but Mrs. Ridge brings her 7 children, and they escape over here. And the Ridge house is right where they went, except it didn't look like it then. It was a 1-story dog trot that they bought from a guy, Shepherd maybe, does anybody remember that name? Is that the name? Anyway, when they were, if you saw it, I think I've talked to some of you guys, when they were redoing the Ridge house recently, I went by there, they had not done everything, and you could see the line. I could see how the thing was so clearly done. You know, I don't have the exact dates on it, but you could see that dog house, the dog trot home of that 1 story. And then right above it, you can see they built the 2nd floor, and they built that portico later. I've been trying to pin it down exactly when that was done, and I think I'm just going to say about 1850. And I'm going to guess that it was George Baker, because he built a lot of stuff then. He built the headquarters house, the Baxter house, and the last courthouse before the war. But I don't know for sure. Anyway, so that's Mrs. Ridge, and she came over here. I always wonder why here, and I guess this was the closest place that was organized as a town. It was only 11 years old town at the time, really small, but there was at least there was a county sheriff, you know, so they felt safe here anyway. And with her, of course, because she'd been with the family since Georgia, since way back, was Sophia Sawyer, who was going to, right up here, right across from us, going to put her Fayetteville Female Seminary. And I think it was Cora, somebody asked me, they said, we want to know about Sophia Sawyer. I said, okay, I'll do a little more about Sophia Sawyer. Anyway, I think I don't know if she was. Yeah, I think she, what is that Congregationalist from Massachusetts? Kind of puritanical folk. Like, for example, when she got here, they didn't have a school yet, and somewhere on the square they had a building. They were 2nd floor or whatever, and there were actors on the other floor. She didn't want her girls around the actors because they would ruin their lives if you saw an actor. But anyway, so she started school back in New Echota, and one of her really cool things is she was teaching enslaved children, which was against the law, as you probably guys know, everywhere all over the South. And the Georgia militia came on to the area where the Cherokee were, and were going to arrest her and all that sort of stuff. And she just stared them down and said they had no authority in the Cherokee Nation, and they backed off, which is pretty cool for the time. That's extremely cool, because if you read my article about Reverend Anthony Bewley, a stand like that can get you actually killed. And so that's pretty cool. Anyway, so they, and I was trying to look this up too, because little baby Flora, I looked at it, was born in April of 1837. And I'm going, well, when did John and Sarah and the kids take off? Because they didn't go with Stan Wadey and Major Ridge. They took an actual group out. They went on their own. Maybe they might have tagged along somewhere, but they didn't go with a regular group. But anyway, I found out today they got over to the territory in late November 1837. So she would have been able to travel with the baby at some time and make it by then. So I was fretting out. When did that happen? When did that go? Anyway, so then they settle up there, as I told you, in that Honey Creek area up there in northeast Oklahoma. And then 1839 is the relocation here. And then anyway, she had the school from, well, David Walker and Stephen K. Stone, I think, provided land and resources to build her school, which was right up here between Locust and School on the south side of the mountain, right up here. When I do my tours, I usually show everybody where it was. Anyway, so the school lasted what was the lady's name? Lucretia Smith or something like that. She kept it going until the Civil War. But Sophia Sawyer died in 1854, and if you go to Evergreen, you can see her obelisk, and it has that she has done what she could there, which I always like. One thing I always have to say about Sophia Sawyer is not very nice, but I think she was what we call, bipolar? Because they describe her as being really up and then really down a lot. Isn't that kind of what that is? So I think about the Puritans and that kind of lifestyle. I think it's conducive to maybe bipolarism. No offense intended. If there's any Puritans left. Okay, and there's a little more stuff here. We got, this is Elias Boudinot's son, E.C. He was a little bitty guy when all this happened. And he's another handsome dude. In fact, if you read Marion Tebbett's journal, she just gushes about this guy. He's the most handsome dude she ever met. She about passed out, I think, when he came over. But he's an interesting character, again, complicated. He went east and studied, came back, came to Fayetteville. He studied law under A.M. Wilson, who, if you guys know, is Charles Morrow Wilson's grandpa. And that's Charles Morrow Wilson's why we got Wilson Park. He sold a bunch of land to the city for it. Anyway, so Boudinot studied with him. He served on the Fayetteville City. This is all pre-Civil War in the 1850s. A real young guy. He served on the Fayetteville City Council. He and J.R. Pettigrew started a newspaper called the Arkansan, and we have some copies up here in microfilm. It's interesting to read. The bad part of it is they were really, really pro-slavery and anti-abolitionists. And man, if you want to read some stuff, read some of the ads back in those days. Anyway, so that's E.C. Boudinot, and he was around town a lot. After the war, he and actually John Rollin went back to D.C. to try to get reparations for the Southern Cherokee for the stuff they experienced during the war, loss of land and stuff like that, and property and cattle. Anyway, so the local guys liked him a lot too. They called him Booty. So he was a fixture here in Fayetteville up until the latter part of his life. He died in Fort Smith, and he's buried down there and he died in 1890. Well, anyway, let me keep going. How we doing? How we doing, Cora? 30 minutes. Oop, about to get moving. Well, we're almost there. I'm on 30, and I'll have it. So anyway, so in 1922, the Western Methodist Assembly bought the top of East Mountain and renamed it Mount Sequoia in honor of Sequoia, the guy that created the Cherokee syllabary, if I said that right. His name he was also known as George Guest or George Guest, and he was over in with the old settlers for a while and stuff. Anyway, okay, so I've forgotten, I can never remember her name, but there was a lady in the assembly decided to name it Mount Sequoia because she was convinced that Sequoia had camped out up there. Well, I've read every biography I can find, everything I can find on Sequoia. I can't even place him anywhere near here. Now, he would have been over, he might have gone through here on his way to the IT, the Indian Territory. He might have done that, but I don't think so. But that's cool. He deserves it. Anyway, and then in February of 27, I know I'm a lunatic. In February of 27 and February of 31, Will Rogers came up here and spoke at the U of A. I love the Will Rogers story because his fourth film, Water, Water Everywhere, was written by Will Lighton. That's the Lighton family. They're just about my favorite family ever lived here. They were all creatives, could be writers and stuff. And Will Lighton, the dad, wrote the book that that screenplay was based on. So they became fast friends. So whenever Will Rogers would come to town, he would stay with the Lightons in both these things. And if you go on Arkansas Avenue in the middle of the Esplanade about where Lafayette comes up there, there's a plaque to Will, and Mrs. Lighton was instrumental in getting that plaque put up for Will. Now the son, Bud, Lewis Bud Lighton, became a Hollywood producer, and the most famous one, this is long ago now, the most famous one you might have heard of was A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. He produced that movie in 1948. Anyway, so I love the Will Rogers stuff and the Lighton family. One of the girls, Peggy Lighton, was the first female attorney in Northwest Arkansas. She handled my sister's divorce case. You probably, by now too, you guys probably know I personalize everything. When I do my tours, I give you my memories, and so you're going to get that too. Okay, so more recently, we got to remember the removal riders, which I love. I follow them every year. I love that. If I was a young guy, I'd try to sneak in there and be part of it. And 2014 or 15, I actually got to speak to them, which was kind of fun. But they do it, they've been doing it annually ever since, and I just loved it. It's such a cool thing to do. And she's gone now, but Stacy Leeds, a member of the Cherokee Nation, was the dean of the law school at the U of A. Now she's at my alma mater, Arizona State. She's out there now. I always have to say that. I can't say it right. And my pal, Sean Touton, the English professor at the U of A, and I think his title is head of the, or chair of the Native American Studies, maybe, is the title of it. And then look who's on there. Rebecca. Teaches an award-winning teacher at Haas Hall, and directly descended from these folks I've been talking about, which, if you guys know me, my favorite thing, like when I was the president of the Historical Society and just up there all the time, my favorite thing is to meet people that were from the beginning of this town. I've met about 6 or 7 different families from really way back, and it's I just love that. The continuity, I guess, the sense of continuity in history is really cool, but she is directly from the people we're talking about. Okay, I think that gets us now. Well, I know this lady by Facebook, Leslie Simmons. I promised her I would push her book one time. It's a gigantic book. I've not read it, but it's about John and Sarah's relationship. Rebecca, have you read it?
A chapter.
Because it's massive, like 700 pages or something. It took her 5 years to read it. That one book's more than all my books put together. What, Bob?
It took her 20 years to write it, and it's very detailed research.
Oh, yeah.
It's full of factual information. It is nonfiction. Excuse me, it's fiction because she had to create the dialogue.
Oh, well, it's creative nonfiction, I think. And she also has won a bunch of awards already, too. So, you know.
So that's
I will look at it someday, but I don't know if I'm going to read 700 pages. It's like Stephen King, right? Somebody stop him. Okay, so I promised her I'd do that, and I did it. Now, how much time we got left for John Rollin? Speed it up. Okay, I got to speed up John Rollin. I hate to do that, but I had to go back. Well, there he is, and I think he's really handsome and very intense. And now that we've talked about it, you know why he's intense. This guy's got a serious case of PTSD from watching your father slaughtered right in front of you when you're 12 years old. Can you imagine? I mean, it's hard to even comprehend it. Anyway, he only lived to be 40 years old. Okay, so quick, I'm trying to go fast now. I love to write about writers, you know that. I love to write about writers. I write stories, I write poems, I write articles. They're one of my favorite topics. Okay, so I'm trying to get into John Rollin, right? And I'll talk about this some more. I'm having trouble with the poetry. It's real 19th century sort of, I'm not digging it. And then I read the book, The Life and Times of the Mexican bandit Joaquin Murrieta, and I'm going, me and you, J.R.R., we're on it now, because I really like that, and that was really great. So anyway, so let's take a look at John Rollin a little bit. So okay, so I told you about that, and I told you about the other part. Came with his mama on July the 1st. That's from a biography, as I'll show you the name here later on. And so he saw his daddy, and he actually went to Sophia Sawyer School. She allowed guys during the daytime, boys, young guys. And so John Rollin actually attended Sophia Sawyer School up here. That's why I wrote he once lived in Fayetteville. He lived here a little while, a few years. And then, yeah, you see I've got the dates up there. Around 1843, they sent him off to this great Barrington School in Massachusetts. And you know, if you read it, you can see the poetry of the book. He was a really intelligent guy, really well educated, and very creative. He had all that stuff. Plus, he had this incredible intensity. And I'll just go ahead and mention now so I don't forget it. He firmly, 100% believed that John Ross was behind all the killings. He actually conspired with some of his relatives to try to actually kill John Ross. It never happened, but he wrote about him. He wanted to kill John Ross, and I think that's why we see here in a little bit he killed this other guy maybe. Okay, so in 47, so he's 20 years old. He married Elizabeth Wilson. They had a little girl, I think Alice Bird is her name, and this guy was sometimes called Judge Kell. This is after he married this lady, he moved back to Honey Creek area. I think he took it to the old farm, tried to build it back up. This guy, according to the story, grabbed one of John Rollin's horses and gelded it. How are we doing, Nancy? So he gelded the horse. Well, John Rollin, it's a capital offense basically to take somebody's horse in the old days. So John Rollin killed him. Sorry. Anyway, and then he said, well, that's not going to work. Kill the guy. So he went over to Missouri to try to avoid being prosecuted. And then he came back here to Arkansas briefly, and he talked his little brother Aeneas into it, and they joined Matthew Leeper, if you know him. His daddy was James Leeper, the Revolutionary War guy, was buried down there on Pump Station Road, early residence after the Megars. So Matthew Leeper took a bunch of guys out to California for the gold rush, including John Rollin and Aeneas. And I read some details from John Rollin of that trip, and man, that was some rough going there. They would sometimes go days without water, and it was just awful. They didn't know what they were doing. They just heard there was gold in California. They didn't know where it was. Anyway, so he didn't do well out there at all, and both he and Aeneas came back. Aeneas came back, and John Rollin stayed out there. Okay, and so these are a couple of these early poems to a thundercloud, and if you can see any of that, can you see that? Thou deep black cloud, boom on, I boom. Thy utmost terrors, let them loom, to shroud the earth in august gloom. That kind of stuff. It's like, it's just not my cup of tea. But the more I'm reading it, the less it's bugging me, because I like the guy. But anyway, so he's 19 years old. He's 19 years old. He's writing poems. That's in the Arkansas State Gazette. And if you look, you can see at the bottom, it says Osage, November 30th, 1846. I believe that's Osage Prairie, which is Bentonville, and that's where they went. The Ridge family, Mrs. Ridge, moved, not all the kids, but apparently most of them, moved them up to Bentonville, Osage Prairie, because my pal, my late friend A.D. Poole, wrote a great article about the Ridges, and he said they moved up there in 42, but she was paying taxes in Washington County in 44, so I think she moved in 44 or 45, because then she starts paying taxes in Benton County. Anyway, so I think he wrote that up there in Osage Prairie, so he's 19 years old and got it published. And then, so that was there, and then when he's out in California in 1854, which is a key year for him, he publishes this poem, Mount Shasta, and it's got the same bombastic kind of stuff in mid-19th century poetic devices and stuff, which is cool. This is really a popular poem. It's been reprinted, I bet you, 100 times in different things. They reprinted it all over California. They loved it. They loved it. It made his reputation to a certain degree. And there he's a little bit older. But anyways, I'm not going to read this stuff. I don't have time. They'll be throwing stuff at me. Anyway, so there's a couple of early poems. So I'm still wavering, right? I'm going, man, I like this guy, but I'm not finding a way in. You got to find a way in. And then, here he is. Same year, he wrote that. Apparently California was an absolute mess about this time, because let's face it, I mean, the Anglo-European settlers are just like that, whatever. They're coming everywhere. And so now they got California. It was filled with mostly Mexican people, or Spanish Mexican, if you will, because it's kind of both, Viceroy of Spain, all that. And you've got native people there. And they were treated horribly. They call them the Digger Indians, I think because they dug for roots, so they thought they were like really, really, primitive and stuff like that. So anyway, this Joaquin Murrieta was going to take vengeance on all these guys, taking his land and doing all these horrible atrocities to him. So I read this book, and I'm like, whoa! It's really good. It's really fun and interesting, entertaining. A little bit of dime novel to it, but it's really good, really fun. And he said he never even cleared a profit on this book. but it made him famous. And that's the whole point here, is that I hadn't said this yet. John Rollin Ridge is considered to be the first Native American novelist, which is really a significant thing. So anyway, now I think, yeah, oh yeah, it morphs into Zorro. So now he didn't do it, but other writers picked it up. You know, things were a little loosey-goosey on the you know, whose material you can use in the old days. Like even W.S. Campbell, 100 Years of Fayetteville, he just plopped stuff down in there from other sources, you know, funk. Anyway, so other writers took this off and turned Joaquin Murrieta into Zorro. And so maybe you guys remember when I was a kid, Disney had Zorro. It was a Guy Williams. He's cutting Z's in people's shirts. Anyway, so there you go. So that's why he morphed into that. So it backed up then to give him more fame that he's the source of the Zorro tales. And Finnan, yeah. So when he's out there, the mining didn't work for him. He's, like I said, he's a really smart guy, well educated, and he's writing. So he's a newspaper man. He's actually more of a newspaper man than he kind of is anything. And look at all these newspapers he was on. From 56, 57, Sacramento, and this is a fun one, the Sacramento Bee, which is still around. He's given credit for starting it. I ran a thing, I read today, I went to their website to read about their history. He was only there 1 week. 1 week. So I'm thinking, I don't know the story, I'm thinking the owner, publisher, knew him, said, come in here and get us going while I bring in a full-time editor or something like that. Anyway, so then, and then from 57 to 61, he's in Marysville. This is all up around the Sacramento, Northern California area. And look at those papers he's in there. The 3 of them, in 3 different papers in Marysville. In the start of the Civil War, he's at the Evening Journal and National Herald. And it's, again, I have to, the truth, he was pro-Confederate. There's no getting around it. And then seeing right through the Civil War, he went to back and forth all these different places. And Grass Valley, I don't know if it still exists, but a little place, he had in the newspaper there, and that's where he died at 40 years of age. And he was before he got encephalitis, was that brain fever. I don't even know what that is, but it sounds horrible, doesn't it? 40 years old. There's no telling what he might have done if he could live. And this is a plaque put up in 1933, May 16th. You probably can't read that. It says Historic Landmarks Committee of the Native Sons of the Golden West, whoever they are. Got a scary sound, isn't it? Anyway, it was done in 1933. And there is the biography I was telling you about, James W. Perrin, John Rollin Ridge, his life and works, University of Nebraska Press up in Lincoln, 91. I did forget one thing. After he died, his wife, was her name Elizabeth, she, in 68, very next year, she collected all his poems and had them published. So, and they're like I said, a lot of his poems are all over the place. Nancy showed me some book I'd never even seen before. They had 5 of them, and of course it had Mount Shasta as the first one, because that's what he's famous for. And I think, guys, how are we doing on time here? 20 minutes. Oh, maybe we got plenty of time then. That's it. I was speeding through there. I was trying to go like a rocket through there, and I went too fast. Does anybody have any questions or commentary? Fire when ready.
Did you tell us how did he start using that other name? You know, when he was signing.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't talk about his pseudonym, which is actually his name.
Yes.
He used the name Yellowbird. Thank you for bringing that up. In fact, I probably missed a whole bunch of stuff. Just remind me. Yellowbird is the English translation of his Cherokee name, which I'm not going to try to say. It's really complicated. You know how to say it, Rebecca?
I think it's something like
Cheese lost. It's like 4 syllables. Cheese Lutnawati something or other. I'm going, oh, no. It's like, I'm always afraid, like, I wanted to talk about the old settler, because one of their chiefs was a guy named Tolan Teske. I've seen that spelled 5 different ways. Do not know if I'm saying it right, but I always loved the name. Buck Wade's real name, and I hope I'm saying this right, was Galagina. And if you've ever looked at the muster rolls of the Trail of Tears, like I looked at the John Baines one again, I've actually got it. Some of the names are amazing. I just love some of the names. One of my favorite names is that Reverend Bushyhead, Jesse Bushyhead. I love that name. And anyway, there's a whole bunch of cool, but the names translated, there's a way of translating them. And there's a guy named Corntassel and stuff like that. I don't know, I just find it cool.
Did he ever come back once he got up to California?
No, he never came back. He talked about coming back all the time. He never made it.
So he never saw his mother again?
Never saw anybody again.
Did any of his brothers or siblings?
Anita,
come
well,
back?
yes, Andrew Jackson, the youngest, right, of the boys. Yeah, Andrew Jackson ended up, I don't know what he was doing, but he ended up out there, and he's buried in Grass Valley.
They named a brother Andrew Jackson.
They named it, yeah, Andrew Jackson. Well, to the treaty party, they may not have seen Andrew Jackson the same way other people do, you know.
Well, the major fought with him and they were good friends.
Yeah. Well, like I tell everybody, I try to avoid what we call presentism, where we judge the past by today's standards. But my least favorite guy is Andrew Jackson. But I always tell myself, was I ever president of the United States? Did I win the Battle of New Orleans? Did I fight in the Creek Wars where people could kill me? I don't think so. So maybe I'll temper my criticism to a certain, I mean, you don't let it go. You see it, but you just temper it a little bit. Because the other thing we forget is how physical the world was. Like, you know, before 1950 even, my cousins out in the country, except for a truck, you were living in the 19th century out there. There's no electricity, that kind of, you know, plowing behind horses. I watched Otis Parker plow my garden behind horses right there on Combe Street in 1954. You know, it's not that long ago. But the world was really tough and difficult. And every single day, you had to deal with some kind of animal, usually a horse or more horses. You're hitching the horse up or you're hitching up a wagon. And then you got cattle over here and you got chickens over here and you got all kinds of stuff you got to deal with. And then you don't know what's going on because if you're in some, like we were talking before the thing, if you're in some place where there's hardly any law, you don't know what's going to happen. And it's, I'm going astray here, but in the Civil War, Fayetteville was a horrifying place to live. When either the Confederates or the Union were gone, there's nobody. There's a vacuum. And so the bushwhackers would come in here and they can do anything they please. You know, because they're guys like Quantrill's Raiders. You know, there's just guys come in with like 6 guns loaded up and they take whatever they want. So it's a really, really difficult world. So we need to, you know, temper our opinions of people a little bit, but realize how hard it was. And also remember that at any given period, there are like liberals and radicals and in-betweeners, you know what I mean? Like, and it's great when we go back and see somebody like, I love the, well, it sounds silly, the Adams family. I love John Adams, John Quincy, and what's the lady's name, the wife? Abigail. They were abolitionists, man, in the 1700s. You know, holy cow. You talk about a position to take. And like I was talking about that Reverend Anthony Bewley, he was down in Texas, an abolitionist. They hung him for his beliefs, hung him. Well, I mean, we could get beat up now, but there's not now people coming around hanging us for your opinions. Holy heck. Anyway, so it's a very tough world. Yes, Peggy?
The pictures you showed of Sarah Ridge are the ones I've always seen.
Yeah.
Do we have any pictures anywhere of her in her younger days?
I think I saw one somewhere of a little bit younger.
And is that the only picture we have of Sophia Sawyer?
I don't think I've seen any younger ones of her either. But I think I have seen one sometime of Sarah. It's funny. I guess the guys, you know, it's the same old thing, right? The guys get the press.
Did anybody take pictures when they were renovating the Ridge House and so that you could see where the original duck was?
I don't know if they did. I hope they did.
Like that we just did?
Yeah.
So, yeah, so that you can see where the
Where I was talking about,
was.
yeah.
Talked
And
about-
if you go in the foyer, you tell them.
Oh, like, yeah, I have a couple pictures that I took, but when you go in the foyer, it's exposed,
Okay.
where you can see the dog drive.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like Major's house, when you go where he lived in Rome, Georgia, they have exposed of what the house looked like, because I think people think the house looked like they did.
Yeah,
whenever-
it did.
And they didn't,
They
there were
did.
more cabins.
You know what we should do is try to, I was looking at a bunch of your Flora and her husband and Herman and some of the Wadies are all buried in Polson Cemetery, right? And then Sarah and Aeneas are out at Mount Comfort. but they're in unmarked graves. So the people are all over the place, but they're around. Now, my friend Sean Treat and I have talked about it. You know, the plaque on the north side of the west side of the square for Nelson Hackett, and the Nelson Orr I was going to mention. I did forget to mention that. Is that on August 6th, the City Council passed the resolution to put in a plaque for Nelson Orr so that we could rehabilitate him. He was not a desperado at all. He was related to the hierarchy, in fact, of the Cherokee country. He's not just some guy that was in there getting drunk, raising heck. He was one of the main guys. And so we're rehabilitating him, and we'll have a plaque. So we'll have bookend plaques for Nelson Hackett and Nelson Orr, both of whom suffered atrocities from the same family, the Wallace family. Because they're the same guys that sent two guys to Canada to get Nelson Hackett and bring him back here. Anyway, Sean Treat, my friend from University of North Texas, believes that Nelson Hackett was killed somewhere and just thrown away. And I don't know about Nelson Orr. I think he was married, and it said he hung on, and he would have hung on here because the Cherokee buried their dead where they died. Even John Ross buried his wife just across the border in Arkansas, across from the Mississippi, when she died over there. So they buried the people along the way. And Nelson Orr is not on the binge roster when they got to Tahlequah or whatever town they got to. So anyway, we believe, Sean and I believe, that Nelson Orr is probably buried down somewhere near, the park. He was probably just buried down there somewhere. And I think he lasted 3 or 4 days before he died. So someone probably stayed with him, is what I'm guessing. Maybe I think he was married, and maybe a couple of guys to accompany them back over to when he died, back to the territory. So, anything else?
I was wondering how many, you said you saw the roll of like how many came through on the
John Binge.
Yeah, about how many people were there?
There was 1,100 to start with, and I think there was 1,034 made it over there. And what's interesting, if you look at those rolls, you can see all of them. They got data on all of them. They will have, a lot of times there will be like close to 200 people died. But you'll also see there's additions sometimes. I go, what was that? Where'd that guy come from? So maybe they picked him up. Because the Cherokee were in like Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, and North Carolina. So there's a lot of territory in there. So maybe some people were just kind of joining in. But so sometimes but they never have more. I don't think they ever have more than they started with. And they sometimes had the same conductor. There was a guy named Lees, L-E-A-S. I think he conducted 3 of them. So that meant he would just come out, go right back, and get another bunch and bring out. There were three chunks. There was the voluntary. Let me see if I got this right. No, I can't remember how it went anymore. The voluntary and involuntary. There was army detachments, and that didn't work at all. They just got like a few days sometimes, and that was over. They didn't get anywhere. And then they had the voluntary, which, by the way, is interesting. The first voluntary group that left was Major Ridge and Stan Wadey, the Treaty Party guys. The last group to leave was John Ross, Chief John Ross and his people. So it's kind of bookends on the whole idea, the whole thing of the Trail of Tears. So anyway, so Binge was like the 4th one, and yes.
Where did this American name come from? John Rollin Ridge.
From his family. I don't know. I don't know where they were. Do you know where they got? Where John Ridge got his name?
A lot of the siblings have names after friends and family members. I know Dwight from Flora Chamberlain was one of her best friends.
Okay.
Growing up, and so it's usually an honor because
Oh.
Sarah, like his mom has a really interesting,
Yeah.
his mother has a really interesting family history where they hung out with abolition. So it's a very complicated family, except when the parents get married.
Right.
The family gets run out of Connecticut.
Right.
because having a white woman marry
Right.
a Cherokee
Indian.
man was like, oh gosh. And so they actually did away with boarding schools until after the Civil War.
To stop
because
that.
of it. And so, but a lot of the kids are named after family friends. Andrew's
Well,
still like
I just realized too. You're talking last name Ridge. That's because Major Ridge's name in Cherokee translates to the ridge. And so they just took that. And the Boudinot comes from a mentor up in Massachusetts for Buck Wadey. Because his brother Stan never changed his name. But Buck liked his guy so much he changed his name to that. And then he just followed on with the name. So I guess that answers some of it anyway. And I call it, by the way, when I call him John Binge, sometimes I look at it and go, is it Benji? What is it? But his dad and a brother, I think were both, were named Robert. And the dad, I think, was called the Bench. And so I took that, okay, it's Binge then. If the dad's called the Bench, then Binge is how that should be pronounced instead of Benji. There's no extra E in there or something. So I'm guessing a lot of this stuff that made sense to me. Any other questions? Yeah. Thank you very much for putting up with me. Thank you.
The books we have on the back, they're all able to be checked out. And drop your form that
Evaluation.
in